Sunday morning to you. It's the 29th of September, and we're going to do a vanity tray project. We're going to do a small tray and a small covered jar. And we will need casting compound for this, water. Now, the measurement there for the water is for the jar. I can't remember and didn't write down how much the tray takes, but if you guesstimate volume in 2 small coasters, that'll approximate the volume in the vanity tray. Of course, you can always just use your scale and fill up your tray with water and get a better idea. I'm just giving you sort of a by the seat of the pants because I didn't write it down. Sorry about that. And then our colorant for our tray is blue dry tempera paint. And I used a little bit of black liquid tempera paint. I meant to buy powdered tempera paint, and the no-name dollar store had liquid. So that's what I have. And I only used a tiny bit of black to shade my blue because the blue was too bright. I'm pointing out a water spot there to you. I don't know how well it shows up on camera, but it's really obvious in person. And then the back, there's color bursts that didn't get totally incorporated when I mixed the dry tempera paint into the dry casting compound. And I kind of like that color explosion effect, but it only usually shows up on the back. I'm using liquid acrylic paint, and this is old paint, maybe 5-6 years old. It's vanilla because I don't want the pillar jar to be white. I want it to have a little bit of a creamy color. And so I mix up the vanilla, and I'm not happy with knowing that that is going to lighten up once it hits the powder. So I haul out some khaki, which is equally old, and dump some khaki in there until I just eyeball it and get a color that I think is going to work. I think I'm going to have to fish out my ball bearings and add a ball bearing to each of these bottles to mix up that paint, because you'll see in a minute that the khaki left paint globs, for lack of a better term, and I like that effect. It's like terrazzo, except for when it dissolves and gets mixed in the powder, it comes out more of a speckled effect than terrazzo, but it doesn't matter. As long as I get a tint that is not white, I'm fine with it. And I pull out the casting compound. I start my timer so I know I have 15 minutes before I have to pour it. And this works for me. Other people just mix, dump, and pour. I need that timer to remind me to get a move on, because I tend to sort of get lost in the process, and that's fine if I'm not filming. It's relaxing, but if I'm filming, these would be an hour long and you wouldn't want to watch them. So let's speed up the mixing process. This is Resincrete, and I rarely have issues with bubbles, almost never with Resincrete, but I do want to make sure that I have no bubbles because there's a lot of rims in these two pieces. There's the top of the jar, there's the bottom of the jar, and the same for the lid. So I gamble a little bit and add about 10 mils extra of water to make sure it's very, very liquidy. And we mix it up, and we're about ready to pour. And something in me is still not satisfied with that color, so I add some more khaki, and at least in my own head, I'm satisfied. So I am going to get a little bit of speckling or marbling, and it's fine. I'm fine with it. I do spray the molds with alcohol, not because I think that I'm going to have issues like I have in the past, but because I want those rims really smooth if I can get them smooth. So I do it for both the top and the jar. And I dump out the extra alcohol and we pour. I pour my lid first because I often see creators ending up a little short because either their calculations were off or the humidity or what have you in their room has just not quite gotten the measurement correct. So in because I've noticed that both in epoxy and in casting compounds, I decided that I would, if I had to mix up some more and fudge on color matching, I would mix up the overage for the bottom of the jar. And that way, if I had, one part of the foot of the jar, which you'll see in a few minutes, be a lighter or darker color, it wouldn't matter. I could blend that with some other material, like our tinted waxes, for example. Add a row of pearls around the bottom. However, you have to take into consideration the bottom of the jar is going to take a lot of wear and tear and abuse. And that's not, while it's very pretty, it's not very practical to have pearls around the bottom of your jar or around the bottom of your rim, because that's where your fingers are going to naturally grab, as opposed to the top knot. It's just the way people do things. So I don't want things like single pearls or rhinestones or that kind of thing on any place on the jar where there is going to be a lot of wear and tear. I reset the timer and I have tapped my molds, and I will check at 30 minutes to see how we're doing because of that extra water in the mix. I expect that it's going to take longer than 30 minutes. It's about 30 minutes later, and as I expected, the mold is not set. I've tapped it, and it's not liquidy, it's not jiggly, it's solid in that it's not moving, but it is still very wet, and so I'm going to give it a full hour to set up, and then I'll check. It's confession time, because confession is good for the soul, right? The whole reason I did this project, other than to have a nice set, is to try this spray. It is similar to Distress Oxide spray, but it's by a different company. It's called Magic Ink, and they have a smoky blue. So what better thing to try it on than a blue tray? And if you blinked, you probably already missed it. And now I have a mess to clean up, but that's okay. A smart girl would have put down some book pages, or I don't know, some blue handmade paper that we sweated and worked on, not this past summer, but the summer before, and caught all that spray. But apparently I'm not so smart these days. Moving on. Our little vanity jar is solid, and you can see there's some pitting from that paint on the rim of the top, and it's also on the bottom of the jar. I don't care. I can sand it down, or I can leave it, or I can fill it, or do whatever. I'm going to be extremely careful to loosen all of this first, and then I'm going to roll that rim over and try to pull the mold off from the support pieces right there on the top to make sure that I can get the little top knot off as well as possible, and we're successful. These pieces are still warm, and so they're fragile because they're not fully set, but I am satisfied. There are no bubbles other than right there on the top where the compound was exposed to the air. The mold came out clean, and I'm very satisfied. Next, let's move on to our jar, and I'll do the same thing. I'll loosen around the pedestal base, and then I will roll everything down over onto the pillar part of our jar. Once I do that, then I can pull it down and push up from the bottom to get a clean demolding. Again, this was 90 minutes, and we are successful. I was watching another creator this past week talk about how much care she had to use to get something out of the mold. And I've heard that over and over again. And I am starting to look at molds with the question in mind, am I going to be able to unmold that without problems, without things like eyes and feet and ears and so forth being left in the mold? So for this project, I chose a mold that had very little decoration, although it's a classic column type jar. And when it's dry, we'll take a shot and you'll be able to see how the lid fits. Remember I said confession is good for the soul a couple of minutes ago? Well, here's confession number 2. Why did I get involved in UV resin and casting mediums? That mold is a big clue, as are all the references to handmade paper, because another part of me is a junk journaler. And I saw these molds when I was still in the decision process and trying to decide if I wanted to jump in with both feet. This is a 4x6 notebook cover mold. We're going to use scrim tape. That was that big roll. This is what you use to cover the joints between plasterboard and before you put a top coat or a coat of plaster, whatever. So I have cut out all the little binder holes out of that scrim tape, and this width happens to fit perfectly in there side by side. So we're going to strengthen our cover with this tape. It's really strong so that our notebook cover can stand up to wear and tear, especially since it has a 3-ring, in this case it's 5 or 6 ring binder type binding on the right side. So I used the khaki color again to color my water, as well as a paint called Bridal Gold. And you're not going to see gold in it, but it does give it a warmer color than the previous pour for the pillar shaped jar. Now this mold set comes with 3 different sizes. They're standard paper size. I wish right now, I've been waiting for like 2 months to do this. I wish now that I started this that I would have bought 2 sets of these molds so I could pour front and back cover at the same time, so as I wouldn't have the risk of color differences in the front and back cover. But nevertheless, let's just proceed on. We have sped up our mixing process immensely. Now we're ready to pour, and this is a very shallow mold. We have not had good luck with shallow molds and casting compounds, but what we are going to do is strengthen it with that scrim tape. So I am pouring the thinnest layer I can because I want to hide the scrim tape if I can. If I can't, no big deal. I'll use it as a decorative feature, but I'm going to give it a shot so you can see how thin it is. Now, through the magic of a jump cut, we have gotten to the point where I'm done tapping and fiddling and whatnot and so forth, and we're going to put our scrim tape in, and I put it in over the part on the right hand side with the holes first, and I'm going to put the second tape in next, and I'm going to do this because I want to make sure that that scrim tape doesn't trap any bubbles if I can help it, and I'm going to pop any that do come to the surface while pushing that scrim tape down into the casting compound and at least covering it a tiny bit. I think I get out my Sgraffito tool and start popping bubbles and sinking that scrim tape the best I can, and then I pour my second layer. I also did quite a few, well, not quite a few, maybe 5 or 6 over pours, including a round coaster, because I can't find my square coaster. I don't know where it is. It might be in the kitchen drying on the dish rack for all I know, and just didn't bother to go look because the timer is ticking away. Now, what I can tell you is I did a very careful and good job of making this cover. However, my over pours, with the exception of the coaster, are a hot mess. So we're going to jump to the end of this and look at the demolding. So in case you were wondering if the notebook was the only surprise today, the answer is no. We have 2 little friends here who are over pours, and they'll be included in other projects. We're starting to get quite a little pile of over pours as inclusions. I probably could have done the larger alpaca on that little sheet, but I didn't think I had enough, and as it turns out, I had enough for 2 little alpacas and 4 of those domed rectangular bracelet links. The larger ones turned out fine. The smaller ones will just get crushed up and thrown into the reject pile. I'm pointing out that there's a little bit of pitting on the bottom of this coaster from bubbles that popped, and otherwise it's completely smooth, no big deal. And now for our notebook cover. Now the scrim tape, once we get this unmolded, the scrim tape did show through on the backside. That can be fixed a number of different ways. There was no problem with the front side other than some staining, which can be masked again with a bunch of different techniques. The overpour flaked off. The holes needed to be repunched because there was a little bit of overpour in them, and I get my paintbrush stuck. And luckily, I only got it stuck once, and all of the holes were repunched easily. Speaking of handmade paper, which we haven't for at least 5 minutes, one of the ways that I can cover the back is to lay down some handmade paper. And I have some crackle medium that might be an interesting experiment for the back of that notebook cover to hide the bits that showed through. Here's everything we made today, including the tray that we dyed blue with tempera paint and then oversprayed with magic ink spray. It turned out really nice. And the pillar jar that we poured, it was a set that was meant to go together, so that jar just fits in the round side. And then the coaster, and I put the ring bindings, they're actually 2 separate pieces, in the 6 holes in our notebook cover. And because we have so many unfinished projects or orphans that could use some TLC, we might actually spend some time doing some finishing treatments further than what we've already done. The notebook cover was a trial run to see if we could strengthen the casting compound enough to be able to actually use one. Now, will I use this size or will I go up a size or 2? I don't know, but the trial run turned out really well. I hope you enjoyed this. I know I did. I am so glad to be over and through the, what do you want to call it, newbie shakedown, big disaster kind of every week phase. Thanks for joining me. God bless you, and I'll see you real soon.